Over the years, cultural dress has evolved and has been used as a form of self-expression and often as a fashion statement. To look at some of the meaning carried behind traditional wear in some South African cultural groups, I am now joined by Professor Musa Xulu, who is a cultural expert. Professor Xulu, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and a happy Heritage Day to you. I see you've also adorned a modern version of African attire as well. Let's talk a little bit more about the evolution of African fashion.
Well, good morning, Masa, and good morning to your viewers. Let me start by congratulating the Mackenzie brothers. I listened to them as you were interviewing them. And I think the next time we talk to them, it must be in the direction of heritage economics and cultural economics. Because this subject of African dress is at the center of a business opportunity that people have captured, which is fashion design, using various types of fabrics, most of which started arriving here in the 1800s from Europe. But those fabrics have been adjusted and have been designed to give meaning to African expressions of dress and self-ornamentation. It's not only the fabrics, but also things like beads and so on. When you dress up in a particular way, maybe like you said, maybe I'm also trying to do the same today, it's usually a statement of identity that I am an African, as President Thabo Mbeki would say in 1996. I am an African, and look at me, how I am capable of self-ornamentation in a manner that links my present with my past and also links my present with the future. There has been an evolution of fashion design. Let me call it fashion design because that's what the United Nations acknowledges as a sector. In terms of adjusting the colors, you will remember, for example, there is a Basotho Sishweshwe, which when it came, it was generally gray and blue, or gray and white, or blue and white. But today, fashion designers around the country are using various colors on the same garment to expand this fashion expression of Africanness. Usually, if it is women, it will be a dress and then a headscarf. That's rolled in a manner that you will never find anywhere else in the world. And on a Heritage Day like this, it becomes very relevant.
When it comes to those kinds of fashions as well, or dress code as well, a lot of the times there's meaning behind what is being worn. It's also a form of identity as well. So if you wear a certain headscarf in a certain way, it could signify something else. When you're wearing certain beads, that they could signify a different age as well. But now we've kind of evolved into a space where, I mean, there are things that are certain. You know, when you see the Xhosa attire, it's quite distinct. When you see a Xibelani, that's quite distinct. You know which culture that is from. When you see the Basotho Sishweshwe, you know where that is from as well, even though, like you're saying, there's been this mix as well and evolving of these fabrics and beads as well. But it gets to a point where with certain things, particular beads, I mean, I'm wearing them today as well, we don't necessarily, can we track which culture they come from? Because it seems across the board, every African attire will include beads.
Well, beads have been around for thousands of years. But over the past decades, Europe has been able to produce plastic beads, which is also now produced a lot in China. Plastic beads comes out of mass production. Go to the factory and they will produce a mass production of that. The meaning of it, when it comes to beads, let me start with the issue of identity. Identity and geographics always go together. There's a genre here in KwaZulu called Maskandi music. It has been a tradition that a Maskandi musician will sing and play his guitar, and then somewhere in the middle will introduce himself in terms of geographics, where he comes from, who his traditional chief is, which river, before water was supplied to everywhere now, which river he drinks water. So you'll find that you can see distinctly that is a Basotho Seshweshwe and Basotho fashion. You can see distinctly that is the Xhosa. If when the Xhosa, for example, use beads, it's usually white. And very distinct. You can see whether they are wearing it around the head or is part of the garment. It's they usually use the white color. Among the Zulus, they like red as well as green, and maybe I can say green also helps them to identify, because most of KwaZulu territory geographically is green because of many rainfalls around the year. So you will find that it becomes also easy to, even if they are wearing beads in Ndebele, you'll easily see when Mama Mahlango or whoever is wearing on Ndebele traditional attire that is made out of modern garments. You can say that's Ndebele. That's so everyone becomes distinct as a result of geographics, but also not just Black people. Also, I have seen among the South Africans of Indian origin, for example, you'll also find a lot of distinctness in terms of maybe it moves in the direction of religion when it comes to them. And then you will also find that among the Afrikaners, they tend to dress up in a particular manner that makes them to be South Africans. One of the things is khaki and shorts, for example. Then you know he's an Afrikaner and he's a farmer. So a day like today, like they're doing around the country, Vicksburg and everywhere else, is reflecting that diversity, which sometimes we're not conscious of, but it's there and is existing. And at some stage, we have to go deeper into its economic possibilities in order to be able to address the unemployment and the slow growth of the economy. There's opportunities there as well dealing now with the fashion design and so on.
But Professor Xulu, do you think nowadays there's more of an acceptance of kind of like a cross-pollination of cultures? So, for instance, a Mopedi woman dressed in Xhosa attire at a traditional wedding, that wouldn't be frowned upon in any way whatsoever. But it doesn't identify them in terms of what you're saying, geography. So sometimes now when you're looking at somebody dressed in a certain African attire, it doesn't necessarily signify that they are from a certain geographical place or that they are from a certain culture. But this kind of movement of being able to cross-pollinate cultures as well, is that something that should be welcomed as well?
No, that should be welcomed. I use the word geographics as a point of entry into cultural diversity. Usually, that's where it starts. But as people become sophisticated and go to universities and live in urban areas, they will adjust whatever fashion design they like at that point in time. I remember at some stage, the Seshweshwe was very popular among Zulu women here in KZN. And that did not make them to become Basotho, but they liked it because it has some kind of expression that still indigenized them. Because at the end of it all, it's about indigenization and decolonization. These people are wearing in this way, are dressing up in this way because they want to prove that colonialism did not triumph over them. And they have the freedom now, which Minister Mackenzie was talking about, to choose what to wear and to go to wherever without falling under any pressures from the authorities.
And speaking of that too, a term that has kind of, been up there in recent years is cultural appropriation when it comes to people who aren't of that culture, but specifically when it comes to people who aren't of color, specifically white people, when it comes to Heritage Day, there's almost kind of like a dilemma, like that they feel, can they wear these African clothes that are beautiful and they'd like to, or will they be seen as culturally appropriating? But also they're South Africans, they're African.
Well, I always say, Musa, my sister, that when it comes to white South Africans, for most of the time, I've traveled a little bit around the world, they will not fit a lot in Europe. They fit more here because they have adjusted a lot to life here. In terms of also, many of them now speak African languages, and they also behave in manners that usually would be found among Africans in terms of social behavior. There is also intermarriage, which is taking place between blacks and whites. And I've seen them sometimes going to a family in a township or rural areas to do lobola negotiations. And they adjust themselves to doing lobola negotiations in the manner that Africans would do them. You will find that today, well, not many, but there'll be lots of white ladies, for example, wearing beads and wearing those kinds of garments that make them to be South Africans, to be distinct from, say, whites in Europe or in America.
And that is also a beautiful thing indeed. Professor Musa Xulu, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us. Always a pleasure indeed.